Hello and welcome to this show and tell, let's call it that way, little instructional video about the turret package that I show in the marketplace. You will find the link below this video, and you can also see an instructional video on the same channel as you see this particular video, so you can at any time choose to see how the actual turrets function inside a environment and with certain actions applied to them. But first, let's just show you how you implement one of these turrets. You see I have a couple of basic set turret options down here. These are the most usable ones that I can, that I have in this package. You'll see the turret base as it is called. You see a placeable turret builder, a placeable turret base blueprint, and a control unit blueprint. This guy, the placeable turret base blueprint, is not actually meant to be placed inside the environment, but is actually created through the placeable turret builder. So normally you can place this in the environment, but it is not meant to do so. So I'll not show you how to do that. I'm just going to through the placeable turret builder blueprint. But first let's focus on the turret base blueprint. Okay, so this guy is simply added to the scene by dragging it in, of course. That's quite clear and quite simple. Give it a good location where you're happy at, and let's see what it has to offer. First of all, notice the little pictogram inside the turret mount. You see there's this bullet in the center, meaning that at the moment it is used as a gun head that uses the minigun. So we can actually find that back in its details panel here on the side. If you go to the details panel, you see a couple of things. You see the turret mount, the head settings, and we can see the death and repair settings. I will go through all these guys, but first let's go to the head settings, allowing us to choose a different head for our turret. At the moment, as I said, it's the minigun, or I like to call it somewhat shorter, so I called it the gun. When we open up this list, we can also find a flamer, a missile, and a laser option underneath the heads. And when you choose any of these, notice that the pictogram changes to indicate which type of head you have chosen. So the missile shows an explosion, the laser shows you a laser pictogram, and the flamer shows you a little flame. So it should be quite clear what kind of head is applied to the turret. The red arrow, of course, indicates in which direction the turret focuses from the start on. So in which direction it is looking when the game will start. And in which direction, of course, the head is focusing then on. Okay, so I will go back to the gun for now, leave it a little bit more default. The fire rate, of course, is how fast a gun head fires. In this case, 1 per second, so that's not very fast for the minigun. But it also is meant for how fast damage is applied. If you take, for instance, the laser head or the flamer head, it doesn't actually shoot projectiles, but it applies damage every few moments in a second. And in this case, it's just 1 moment per second. So when we lower down this value, we can make it 2 times per second, and of course the lower the value, the faster and the quicker it applies damage. And this is also for the gun. So when you shoot your gun and you make this value smaller, like say 0.05, the minigun would really fire fast and an enormous amount of projectiles, meaning it can really destroy and kill quite fast and quite quick. The second thing that's very important in the head settings is what type of collision is the turret tracking. Turrets track through collision types, meaning that if a character or if an object has a certain collision that it is allowed to track, it will focus on that type of collision and start firing on it. So in this case you see it is focusing on pawns, but you can also choose any of the preset normal Unreal variants of collisions. But if you add your own collision types in here, you will find them too inside this list, allowing you to actually choose other collision types to focus on and shoot at. Of course, this also means that the turret must be blocked by anything that is not a target. So in this case we find the object collision blockers right underneath the targeting blocks. So in this case you see that he must ignore world statics, world dynamics, physics bodies, vehicles and destructibles. Again, add your own collision types in here if you want the turret not to track those particular types. Meaning that, for instance, if a character is able to hide behind one of these sea containers, the sea container must have a collision type that is not able to be tracked by the turret. So it can act as a blocker. The laser color is of course quite clear. That's the color that the laser has when it is looking around. What is very important to know is that with the laser many options are extra available to adjust that laser. For instance, how broad its vision is. When the vision is 1.0, it means the laser is 1 centimeter in width, meaning it's a very tiny small laser beam. And the chances that it hits must be exactly when the laser hits its target, so perfectly for a laser tracking system. But if you don't really like the whole laser tracking system, you can broaden up the width of the turret vision and actually make it function as if it was a more of a camera type of tracking system. So you can actually give it a broad, wide searching angle and let it look around as if it was a camera. The other thing that's important is the length in which the laser is focusing. You see, normally lasers are sort of indefinite, but they die out, of course, over distance. And in this case, I give it a very long distance before the actual laser starts to die out. This is, of course, useful for large maps. But if you have short environments, or for instance want to have a turret only start firing when a target is very close, you have to change this length to a shorter length. This is especially more functional for a flamethrower. You don't want the flamethrower to actually fire if a person is 500 meters away, because then you have just this stupid little flame in the distance that doesn't do anything. So make sure that per type of turret you choose a different size length, and of course experiment with what works best for you. The laser angle is actually an adjuster that helps you rechange the angle of the laser depending on the turret heads, and you see I have multiple turret heads in here. The laser is either a little bit more on the top of the head or to the side of a head, and by adjusting the laser it is more attuned to where the actual hitting point of a projectile is. So you can change the angle of the laser to align it with the projectile direction. And you see I have a little distance already presetted in of -1, so that is actually quite well for most of the heads. The missile actually needs a little bit more, but all the heads are quite aligned with their original lasers. Depending if you want to implement your own static meshes in this turret, then it's very important that you choose your own lengths in here and of course your own angles. The final two functions that you find in the head settings are called hide laser on hit target and hide tracking laser. These guys are actually very important for visual effects inside your laser or in your turret. Hide laser on hit target means that as soon as the turret finds its target and hits its target, the laser will disappear. This is especially visually more interesting when you're using a laser head turret, because otherwise you have like these two lasers pointing at the same time at its target, and that looks a little bit silly. So making the laser hide itself and only firing its gun or its laser turret, then it looks a little bit more interesting. But it is up to you to use this or not. You could also completely hide the laser if you don't like it. So if you want to have that particular camera width of view to your target or to your turret, then I advise you to actually hide the tracking laser completely, and there is no laser available anymore. Okay, let's go to the top. Deactivation of the turret. You see, I can deactivate the turret. Sounds maybe a little bit silly, because why in heaven's name would you like to deactivate the turret if it needs to shoot and kill targets or whatever? Well, this is especially interesting when you combine it, and let's go back to the turret folder over here, combine it with the control unit blueprint, because this guy can actually activate and deactivate a turret, allowing the user of the turret to actually activate it at any time he sees fit. So you could start off with a deactivated turret that is activated at a later time through the control unit. could be fun, for instance, for a single player game instead of multiplayer. The tag is very important, again, in combination with the control unit. Control units need to communicate with turrets, and they can only do that through a tag. Make sure that the name of the turret tag is exactly the same as the control unit. Let's also, by the way, add the control unit while we're at it. You see, when I add the control unit, it also has this tag section inside of it. So if this guy is called, for instance, Mr. 1, very simple name, but it is functional, and I use this guy, it must also be number 1. So now these guys communicate with each other. A control unit can actually communicate with multiple turrets. It's not advised because it also registers when a turret is destroyed, and when one turret is destroyed and the other is not destroyed, there's a possibility that this guy gives up errors. So I advise you actually to connect one control unit with one turret. Otherwise, well, you can figure out the errors yourself if you mind them or not. It's not up to me, of course. You bought this package, if you bought this package. Okay, let's go back to the turret. So that's the activation and tagging. It's important for the control unit. The rotation speed is how fast the turret will track its target when it is running around. So when a player is running around, it is targeting this player. From a longer distance, this rotation speed can either be a little bit too slow or too fast. In this case, 200 is a nice average, meaning that if a person runs from a further distance, the turret is actually a little bit too slow, and there is a possibility that bullets hit behind the player and the player can outrun the speed. But of course, heightening this speed makes sure that the turret always tracks its target, or making it slower is actually interesting if you want players to be able to dodge turret fire. So it's up to you which value again works best. The idle rotation is the arc that the turret makes when it is in idle mode. When it is in idle, it plays an animation, it goes through a timeline, and this idle animation can have a custom angle. I limit it to 180 degrees, but you could also choose to manually fill out any other value if you want to. But 180 degrees is a nice angle. You could also make it shorter, 90, but the length of the animation is at the moment 8 seconds, meaning that it goes in 8 seconds from left to right. If you make this angle very small, say 15 degrees, then he very slowly moves 15 degrees to the left and the right, again taking 8 seconds. The effect is not that interesting, so staying above or around 90 degrees is better for a better result. Of course, it's up to you to go into that timeline and adjust the animation. If you don't like the animation that I created for you, simply go inside the timeline and change the keyframes, and you can make your own idle animation. It's not that difficult. The minimum and maximum look angle is the angle in which the turret head is able to turn upward and downward. So if a player runs underneath a turret or jumps over a turret, the turret is limited in its rotation angle. 90 degrees again is a little bit strange if the turret points completely upwards, especially in the modeling of the meshes. Completely turning upwards means that the meshes touches each other, and it is maybe, depending on your own choice, visually not that attractive. So I limit it to a certain angle, but again, it's up to you if you want to change this. Debug lines can help you during gameplay. For instance, if you want to change the turret vision width to a broader size, as I showed you or told you about, you can actually see how broad that is using debug lines. I can show you in a moment how that looks. So let's make turret vision width, for instance, 50 now, and add debug lines to it. You see, you can choose the different debug line length. Watch out with persistence. It can really stack up during gameplay, and it can really make gameplay go a little bit slower. So for one frame is a safer way to go. Final options are using idle. This means that if you don't want an idle animation and want the turret to be just simply static in the environment, you could choose to unuse the idle animation. And you have an option that is called idle from look direction. What does this mean? That means he updates its idle from wherever the turret stops tracking its target. So if first target is in front of him, the idle will move in that direction. If he stops tracking its target to the right or to the left, he will start his idle looking from that particular direction. So he goes 90 degrees in this direction or that direction or completely facing us. If you don't like this, you can always stop it, and he always resets its idle and looks in the direction from which it started in the beginning of the gameplay. So it's up to you what you like visually again best. The final options in here are called def and repair. You can destroy the base and you can destroy the head. This destruction process is of course done through a weapon. Now I do not create weapons for you guys. That is up to you. If you want to implement your own weapons, you have to create it yourself. But to help you with the process, I actually created a stand-in gun. This is just a preset prefab gun that sort of fakes the usability of a gun and how it could damage a turret. This process that is inside this blueprint can then be up to you to apply in your own guns and weapons. It's quite simple, there is not much to it, and there is of course a certain damage system applied to it, how it applies damage to targets and things like that. But it is a very simple setup, this gun. So it's up to you if you want to use its technology and see if you find use for it. But it's mostly meant now for testing the destruction of the turret itself. You can give health to the base, you can give health to the head. I personally like to give the head a few amount or a little bit of health, and I like to give the base a big amount of health, meaning that the base is actually quite strong, but the head is quite fragile, allowing the players or maybe multiplayers to destroy heads of turrets, but not really destroy the bases unless they are able to destroy the base, because heads are repairable. Bases are not repairable. As soon as the base is gone, the game is over. Not the game is over, but the turret is over. It disappears, it's gone. So it's very interesting to keep the base alive, allowing for instance an engineer type of character to repair the head during gameplay and making the turret functional again. But this is all up to you to change these values. You see also the option is repairable, so if you don't want the whole destructional system in there or the repairable system in there, you can take it out. You can even choose a type of character that is able to repair the turret. So if you for instance make a collision type for team A and a collision type for team B, say red collision and blue collision, you can actually say that the red collision types are able to repair turrets of the red team and not be able to repair turrets of the blue team, or vice versa. So this is up to you. The repair radius is the distance that the character must be to be able to repair a turret. So you don't want somebody to repair it all across the room. He really must be close to bang his crank or whatever against the turret to make it fix. We all know our Team Fortress like references, so you get the idea. Anyway, these are all the settings. So it's up to you what you choose, how you activate it. If you combine a turret with the turret activator, so with this turret control unit, it's very important that you connect, by the way, let me rotate it for a moment, yeah, that's better. It's very important that you give the turret control unit the same name or same head type as the turret that it connects to. It's not mandatory to do this, but I made in this particular blueprint, let me go to the blueprint itself, I made a decal for the screens. And these screens, of course, link with the type of head. And they don't do that automatically, so you have to manually say, okay, this particular control unit has the decals of this particular turret that it's connected to. So if this turret is a gun type turret, make sure that the turret control unit is also a gun type turret, or a flame or a missile or laser, whatever you have chosen. Okay, so now when we play this at the moment, you see that this guy now has a very slow movement, because I gave it just a few degrees of looking angle. I did it set 90, probably still is 45, so it's very small. But you see that there is now a, whoops, it tracked me. You see now there is a 60 width or 50 width debug line around it. It's not very clear, but there is a debug helping line around it, and this can help you with the width of the angle look of the turret. You see, by the way, also that he now continues his idle animation from the last looking angle that it had. So that is of course very important. Yeah, you're not gonna shoot me, guy. Okay. So let's see what kind of idle. Oh yeah, it still has an idle of 15. You see, that was quite silly. So let's give it a 90-degree idle, and now you see its movement is much bigger. So it's much broader, and you see also that it's now you can quite clearly see now how broad the debug lines are. My God, my brain is frozen for tonight. But you see, it quite quickly tracks me as soon as I touch those debug lines. And now it lost me because of those little tracker thingies over there. Anyway, you saw it was also instantly active, so let's deactivate it for a moment. And now when I play it, nothing happens until I open here the control unit. You see it's inactive, it is the gun type, and when I click, it activates the gun type or deactivates the gun type. This, by the way, is all done through mouse clicks and keyboard clicks. Those can be found inside the blueprints. Take, for instance, the turret-based blueprint over here. You see activate, for instance, repair is done by the F key. This also can be found back in the documentation. So please be sure to check out the documentation for the inputs. These are my custom inputs. Please choose your own inputs for your own, that fits better with your own game. Okay, so this guy is quite clear. Let's take it out of there. By the way, all these other things you see laying on the ground here, these are test targets. It's just a little fun blueprint that I added to it to test out. Watch for the other video that I made about the turret to see how these guys function. The placeable turret is this guy. It looks quite interesting, but far more interesting what it does. What it actually does is, when you play the game, you have this crate, and when you come in its location, you see it already tells you what to do. Press F, and when I press F, I have this placeable turret thingy. This guy tracks collisions, so as soon as you touch a collision, it says you are not allowed to place a turret here because you have a collisional problem. Also with this guy, you see you can't place it in between because it collides with the targets. So it's very important where you place this guy. Then as soon as it turns blue, you're able to change its angle. I do this with right mouse button click at the moment. You see it changes the angle. And when you've chosen an angle that you like, you click F and you build it. As soon as you build it, it gives you a couple of options. First of all, change the head of the turret. So make it a flamer, a missile, a laser, or, well, actually that's it. You can also change its idle arc. This is of course not as versatile as doing it manually, because then you can actually choose any type of angle you want. But this is meant for in-game usage, so you must limit the player, otherwise, yeah, you get crazy. So I made two little key inputs, one for 90 and two for 180 degrees. So you can switch a 180 degree idle angle or a 90 degree idle angle. Then when you've chosen the head that you like, you click F again and it builds the turret. And there you go, an in-game placeable turret. Now when you're using in-game placeable turrets, it's very important that you choose, again, just like with a normal turret, what kind of object it is tracking. So it must focus on a collision type, and of course which type of collision it must ignore. So in this case world static spawns and other things, and it only focuses on destructibles. Again, with these guys you see that it then can track whatever type you want it to track, and it tracks that and it will shoot at it. Okay, so this is a placeable turret. It doesn't have much options, it is just limited. But if you want to add more options, you just follow up how options are applied through the turret base and apply that in here, or open them up so they are visible and changeable if you want to. But this is most of the options that you actually need. All the other things are sort of created during gameplay, like the head type and the idle arc angle. Yes, so these are actually the main blueprints. There's much more other stuff in here. For instance, you can visit the heads. I already showed you that there are multiple heads available. The flamer, the gun, the laser and the missile. But there's also a base head blueprint. This head has actually all the basic settings that all these other guys also follow up, but they have their own little additive, making their own, giving them their own personality. I made this guy for you so you can make your own. If you want to create your own heads, this is a nice base to start off from and create your own functions in there. So you don't have to build up the whole base or clean up any of my existing heads, but use this as a constructional base. So this is just an extra. Of course, it doesn't have a name, and it is of course not mentioned inside the turret. So you need to add them in the blueprint construction if you want to add your own heads to the list. So the list must be extended to multiple or to more heads. If you want to extend that list, you'll have to go through the enums. In the enums there is a thing called missile order. This can be ignored. That's an enum mainly meant for my missile head. But you have also the choose head enum, in which you can find the gun, the flamer, the missile and the laser. And here you can add your own to the list. Of course it doesn't instantly function, it's just an enum list extra that you add. To make it function again, you have to go into the blueprint and fix it yourself. I'm not going to show you that because then I'll give away how my blueprint works, and that will cut in of course my own sales. So I don't want to cut away that. Of course we want to earn a little bit of money of all the hard work that I've been putting into this. Okay. So those are the heads. Well, the meshes of course show the meshes of everything that I've created for you. You find everything in here. The base has a 4K texture and the heads have a 2K texture and the mount. So that's nice, a nice quality to the meshes. If you, by the way, are interested in your own custom textures, please drop me a line and we'll help you create your own custom textures for the existing meshes, of course, not for your own meshes. That is up to you. The projectiles are, in this case, the bullets. The bullets are just particles, so there are no physical meshes for the bullets. But there is a physical mesh for the bullet shells that fall out of turret. Very small, tiny little thingies, but they still look nice if you see them fall on the ground when you have a turret head shooting. You have the missile itself that fire out of the missile heads. And you have caps that pop off the missile head when it is firing. There's one struct containing all the data that is necessary to communicate through the blueprint certain data like fire rate that must be communicated to the heads, so the heads know how fast they must fire and things like that. So that's all through a struct. Let's hide this, by the way. And you have these temp heads, and these temp heads are only meant while constructing a turret or when a turret is destroyed. So they do not contain any programming, they're just visually. So they only show you these hologram-like visuals. So they're not very technically interesting, they're just a support. You have your standing gun, I already showed you this of course. You have some example maps. Those are one of those, that's the example map 1 is the one that you actually see in the other video about the turret. You have the environmental objects. These are also blueprints, but not too interesting. Maybe the target has some programming stuff in it that can be interesting, but all the other stuff is quite simple and quite basic to implement, and things like the light don't have programming at all. They are just blueprints that construct a light together with a mesh. So they are just to combine stuff together, just like the sea container. The sea container, by the way, is maybe a little bit interesting. As you can see, it's sort of blinky. That means that every time you add it to the scene, it gets a random color. So every time you play the map, all the colors of the C containers change. It's just a tiny little feature that I add to the C containers. So to give it a more random look. If you want to open any of the doors, just select them here in the components, and you can then open the doors to the C container however you see fit. So you can also open them up and walk through them. This is also a mesh that you of course get with this package. In effects you will find all the particles like the flamethrower, the gas, the explosion, impacts and other stuff. Use them however you see fit, and you have your audio sets. So that is actually everything that you find in this package. Any more questions? Well, it doesn't want to delete anymore, don't know why. Any more questions, please let me know and drop me a line. Okay, good luck.